even started. That's pretty phenomenal. So, we're done, right? I'll take it. As your first dad joke of the day, we're going to be hopefully running through your minds with different ideas. Got it? All right, so really quickly, Joseph Dressler, like I said, over at Adform, talk about that over the happy hour and what we are. But let's dive into you guys. All right, so New Balance is an iconic brand in so many different ways. And what we always talk about is every brand kind of has a mystique or kind of a story about it. What would you guys say in the marketing world, or really from a consumer perspective, what makes New Balance stand out?
Okay, there we go. So New Balance has been around for a very long time, 1906. Better? Okay. So New Balance has been around for a very long time. 1906 is when we started. We are a family-run and operated brand. The Davis family has been very generous. We are privately held, which helps with our mystique because we don't ever have to report on anything. But I would say what's great about the brand and the people who are working at the brand for the brand is everyone has that sort of inherent, fearlessly independent mindset that we like to pride ourselves on. So everyone. So I think part of it as well is we really think about the consumer. Everyone who's at the brand, working with the brand, comes from this sort of athletic mindset, whether they were athletes in high school, college, or professional, and that sort of innate spirit and competitiveness, as well as the sort of team camaraderie, has really helped us, particularly over the last couple of years, as things have been very dynamic and challenging, to really come together and focus on the consumer, really tell our story, and honestly stay true to what our path is and where we want to be amongst a very obviously competitive set within the industry.
I mean, it's funny you think about the idea of, you mentioned the word team, competitiveness, also the idea of being a private company, which does allow you to make decisions that you're not forced to market, you're not forced to result on, right, all the time. But I know a lot of people think about New Balance first and foremost as if I talk like this, can you guys hear me? Yeah. No. All right, so what I was going to say was, right, New Balance, I think a lot of us look at New Balance as really more of like a running company. So it's interesting when you talk about teams. Talk to me about how the New Balance transformation has gone from running into much more than just a running company.
Yeah, I mean, we started as a running brand. We started as an arch company, actually, and then eventually moved our way into running performance footwear. And over time, through our heritage, we've explored other sports, which, as we all know, sort of the casualization of footwear comes over, right? Basketball-inspired footwear with Air Force One, 550 for us, and sort of allowing us to expose our brand to many different types of consumers in all of their different stages and their mindsets throughout the day. So something that we talk a lot about is we have one target consumer. It's the global independent. Mediahub helped us craft this target consumer. And that global independent is influenced by so many things that are going around in their lives. And they might transition through a different mindset throughout the day, right? They're going to workout class in the morning, then they're going to work, and then they're playing pickleball in the afternoon with their friends. So allowing us to sort of transition through that with different need states with different products allows us to really capture the hearts and spirits of that consumer, no matter what they're doing in their life.
Yeah, to build on that, I think when Jeff said it well, of like what's your brand's purpose, and then how do you keep the consumer at the center? So if we took a product-centered perspective on the consumer opportunity, we would say we are going to create certain products and then we're going to find a home for them somewhere. That takes a pretty myopic view of how consumers actually live. Apologies, you're guys going to deal with it. So when we think about how consumers actually live, like Katie mentioned, they are multidimensional, they are multifaceted. So even when we're thinking about our sport performance categories and running being the one with which we have the longest history, that's not how the consumers are solely defined. So even somebody who's running is still not running even for nearly 22 hours a day. What are their other interests? What are their hobbies? What are their motivations? What do they want to achieve? And how do we, as good marketers, then better understand that to create product that then meets their needs?
So let's dive into that for a second. So one, you mentioned pickleball. Right? Are there pickleball shoes?
Yes.
Yes. All right, I gotta get
I think they're coming up.
They're coming out.
Sorry.
Gotta get myself a pair of pickleball shoes. All right, the second part is you dove into the idea that New Balance, like other companies, has many different product lines. And so there isn't a New Balance theory that drives everybody in. Talk to me a little bit more about how you work on segmenting audiences, even in different product lines that you have. And you mentioned the idea that they might transition with you as a brand over time. Give the audience a sense of how do you think about that when you're marketing them?
Yeah, I'll lead in and Katie, feel free to chime in. We look first at what connects our target consumer. So regardless of what age somebody might be, there are certain core beliefs and motivators that somebody has. So certainly sport is a part of it, but if we think about this overlapping Venn diagram, there's sport, there's art, there's music, there's just general culture and how people are living. And whenever we can appear at the intersection of all of those, we see the most success. A prime example, so I've played, first of all, is anyone born outside the US in here today? All right, I have at least a few people, so I have to say global football and not soccer. I have played global football my entire life and was thrilled to see at the World Cup in 2022, we had this amazing execution where we had Raheem Sterling wearing a boot that was co-designed by Stone Island, and then we also had the off-field attire with that. This is a way for us to speak with consumers through multiple lenses. So if I only care about what's going on field, I see Raheem has a cool boot. If I'm more into the hype lifestyle, I see that there's something inspired by sport that I can also participate in. So we look at those areas where there are more commonalities than differences, because if we try to just look at like an average, things get nuanced very quickly. So if we even just think of age, income, and that's disposable income in category, not necessarily household income, gender, and then really like style adventurousness, we already have like 4 different layers where an average isn't going to tell the whole story from a consumer insights perspective. So I think going back to one, from a motivation standpoint and a psychographic standpoint, how do we align on values that are similar across all? That helps us give us our overall reach and I think brand consistency. And then when we're looking to apply that within the market, where are those nuances that help tailor like our exact message and how we show up with authority?
Yeah, and to, I guess, bring it to what many people in the room here do, when it comes to how we take those insights and then apply it to our media approach for the consumer within North America, we've tried to do a very good job over the past couple of years of staying focused and staying consistent with the consumer. So that Raheem Sterling example, we had a buy with the World Cup. That game, that match that debuted the boot was on Black Friday, obviously a peak period for a retailer. So we had excellent surround sound during that time, and then we aligned all of our efforts throughout the funnel to ensure that the PR engine was working really hard, that all of our sort of upper, mid, and lower funnel were all working in concert so that we could really amplify that. And even though the supply was extremely limited, the noise and the reverberation that makes for the consumer later down the line allows us to sort of build on these little moments that has sort of brought us to where New Balance is today.
You mentioned a good line, which is obviously a lot of the marketers and agency folks in the room. You have to make decisions on where you put your dollars. Right? No one works at a company, I think, if you do, congratulations, that has endless money to spend on anything you want. Right? The example that was set before with Top Golf, where you got to make decisions at every level. Talk maybe for the room, how do you guys work through what you're going to support, and how do you break it down from that audience perspective? Right? Because there are some products that can be highly profitable, but the audience is small. Right? The ultra running shoe is not a big category for anyone, but they're buying shoes often. So maybe talk to the room on how you guys think strategically about that.
Yeah, so it starts really with our global product game plan that we have, which we have roughly 18 months prior to whenever that season is introing. And we work very closely with our global counterparts to ensure that the game plan that's outlined for a product really meets the needs of all of the consumers that we're trying to go after. It, aligns to our long-range plans and our growth goals from a business perspective, but then also from a cultural or a consumer perspective, it's also aligning to where we want to get to. So for anyone, I'm sure, several years ago, you might have only thought of New Balance as a dad shoe brand. We have obviously worked very hard, or we've been trying to work very hard against transitioning that and making us much younger, making the products more desirable for that younger consumer. And so by having this game plan listed out 18 months prior, we then work back with Mediahub and our media agencies to ensure that we are plotting out the best opportunities for us to intersect the consumer where they already are, right? We're not going to try to make noise around our shoe when everyone else is sort of looking elsewhere. We want to make sure that we're intersecting the consumer where they are and meeting them with whatever their need state is. And then really staying extremely diligent and trying to be as focused as possible. We joke about fewer, bigger, better quite a bit internally, but it is something that we try to achieve. We don't need to be the shoe brand for every single person at every single moment, but we need to do what we're trying to, what we're ultimately trying to win with and do it really well. So that might mean that we say no to opportunities like the Women's World Cup because it wasn't airing at the right times for our consumer in this market. But obviously our EMEA and our APAC counterparts, they went in heavy with Women's World Cup this year. It wasn't an opportunity for us. And so instead we dialed up our streaming opportunities, connected TV, which we talked about earlier, lower funnel social, trying out new opportunities with some of our social partners. So really making sure that we have that balance and we're not trying to swing the pendulum too far one way or the other. This really started, I would say, a couple of years ago too, and we've been pretty diligent with sticking to that game plan for our media approach, and we're seeing the dividends, which is really nice. So.
Katie, I think we can all agree that watching games at 4 o'clock in the morning is not the business thing to do for the World Cup.
Yeah, Charles was up for it.
I was up for it. So
Is that the alarm or natural?
sadly natural. Two additional thoughts on everything that Katie said too. When we're thinking about our upper funnel and lower funnel split, we want to be able to ensure that we're laddering up and laddering down so that the brand and product messages live cohesively. Over the past few years, we've actually done more qualitative research than anything else. Yes, we have a massive analytics engine. We're understanding our buyer behavior better than ever, but we also need the narrative behind that. So if you think about how sort of our analytics and custom research live side by side, think about like sports commentary. You have your play-by-play commentator, and you have your color commentator. Somebody's describing the action, and somebody's trying to describe like why were these things occurring. And a lot of what we heard with qualitative research has been twofold. Either somebody has that like ground brand discovery where either they haven't bought from us before, or they haven't bought that particular like spot in their closet from us before. And so that turns into the initial brand touch point. The other is sometimes, particularly on the lifestyle side, there's just hype and buzz and momentum behind the brand. That can kick off the virtuous cycle where people say, oh, I've been hearing more about New Balance, let me go see what's going on. We notice that most directly within our D2C business, where we've seen our organic traffic actually be incredibly strong over the past few years. And so by having something that coexists within market, regardless if somebody sees product first or if somebody sees brand first, that leads to positive outcomes for us on the back end because we're doing something for that consumer, regardless of how they're engaging with us.
Charles, let's get to the part where we talked about strategy for a bit, and then we talked about how we support the products. But at the end of the day, many of us in the room, probably all of us in the room, are measured on some sort of outcomes or performance. So how do you think about taking those first two paths? How does New Balance think about measurements? And it could be on different kind of campaigns or opportunities, but when you think about that, what are those levels of success? How do you say, oh wow, this worked, you should double down, or all right, it was a good test, we learned something, but we know not to do this again?
Yeah, it's a great question. We tend to think in terms of concentric circles. So if you look at the individual campaign, everybody has the same metrics, right? So we're looking through various either conversion or reach or touch points, impressions, could be long-term profitability for a consumer basis, and we look at all of those. But we try not to look at those just in isolation. We want to then better understand, like, okay, this did X based on how much we invested. What impact did that then have on the category for that product? what impact does that have on the overall brand? And there are certain moments that are big and they're designed as a product moment, but they turn into a brand moment. There are others that are quick hit and maybe off of a highly seasonal product category. Yeah, you do need to go in heavy and you go in for 10 weeks and then you do it all again next year. And that defines success for that product. So I think for us, one of the bigger things we look at too is consumer acquisition. So Jay was joking around earlier, hey, there's a 13-year-old sneaker opportunity. There are new 13-year-olds every single year that are coming into the category that are sort of like independent sneaker buyers with disposable income for the first time. And what our collective experience might be with brands and how we think about what we were all wearing when we were 13, that changes. And in our world, it's probably like every 4 to 5 years, there's like a fresh reset too, where depending on your recent momentum, like you have that generational opportunity with those new consumers. So those are some of the things that we look at, on the campaign level, but then also what are the longer term ramifications.
One question I wanted to tie back to, I forgot to ask you before, was the idea, you mentioned 13-year-olds, which is why it popped back in my mind. I have a 13-year-old daughter, so I feel like I'm right in the midst of everything on social media without knowing anything about social media whatsoever. So from New Balance's perspective, how much are you following the zeitgeist of kind of what's happening in social media? How much are you being a part of it? How much are you trying your own thing, or just being like, maybe that's just not our play?
It's a frequent topic of ours. I think there's a couple of different elements here that sort of on one side. There's the mass market cultural moments, right? And we as a brand try to zig when everyone else is zagging. So you won't necessarily see a Pride collection come out from New Balance. But what you will see from us is we've partnered with Frontrunners New York, which is the LGBTQ group within NYRR, the New York Road Runners, which we have a partnership with. So we'll sponsor their Pride Run, which happens in June during Pride Run. And then we will also come back and bundle with their cheer section during New York City Marathon in November. And then we'll run multiple events with that club throughout the year. So while we aren't necessarily trying to commercialize or capitalize on a rainbow shoe in the month of June, what we are trying to do is to align ourselves with the sort of like emotional tie to that group and proving to that consumer that we're here not just to get a quick buck, but actually to support your group, support your cause, and then in turn, obviously, we hope that that goodwill translates into conversion. And then a very micro example of this is obviously Barbie has been very big this summer. It is not something, we did not come up with a Barbie shoe, we didn't release anything, it wasn't that's not something that we do as a brand either. We don't look for that sort of quick buck.
Does Barbie have a shoe?
I mean, she has a covered heel. Yes, there have been multiple collaborations in the sneaker space with Barbie, but it's not something that we would go after. But what we did do is we saw, obviously, we looked at our site data, and during, just no shocker to anyone, during the last several weeks, pink shoes has spiked in searches. And so what the teams did was they identified that the SEO on our pink shoes page was not optimized. They went in, they optimized it, and they saw sales go from basically 2 to 90x week over week. Just from simple optimizations that they were making, we put it into our lower funnel search, we put it into our paid search and paid social, and we've seen the dividends. And that was a quick thing. We're not really trying to capitalize on it. We're not trying to capitalize on the movie. We're trying to capitalize on the consumer intent. So the consumer is looking for pink shoes. We can help them find pink shoes more easily, or to purchase it from New Balance direct as opposed to going to a Foot Locker or a JD Sports.
I love what you said there, because I think about myself sitting and taking notes when I hear other speakers, and I think the idea of capitalizing that consumer intent is a really interesting moment, because you don't have to be the leader in the space. I don't mean from that 19% balance, but more from the idea of you didn't have to create the idea, but can you capitalize on the momentum that's happening by doing some of truly the basic marketing functions that are there? You just make sure you're doing it the right way. I think it's a great example of success.
Yeah, and it's very easy. Obviously, it churns a lot of what else could we be doing? What other sort of moments could we capitalize on? It's a good exercise for our teams to go through to say oh yeah, for this very small level of effort, we were able to really turn a dollar and help move through some products that maybe would have sold anyways, but we're sort of serving it up to the consumer in a way that's just much more attainable and much easier for them.
Gave you led to one of my last questions I wanted to ask, which was obviously a company like New Balance has D2C and wholesale, right? Many of us buy their shoes at major stores, and obviously now D2C is very popular, but growing every single day. How do you guys think of that balance? And Charles, maybe this is much for you. Talk to me about like the first party data strategy, right? The word that people can't get enough of. How are we building our first party data? How are we building a data lake? What's our CRM strategy? Maybe those two questions, I'll let you guys handle any way you want to, but I think that would help the room kind of tie this story together.
Yeah, so we should done an overview of what we do. I basically, sorry, I'm gonna blame it on the microphone. So I oversee all of our brand and consumer efforts from a national or a regional perspective, and then I have a counterpart who manages all of our marketing for our commercial teams, so D2C and wholesale included. And it goes back to that game plan I talked about. We have that game plan. That game plan is the same whether you are selling into Foot Locker or to a D2C store. And some of our stores are licensed, and some of our stores are owned. So that game plan becomes our guiding light. All retailers, whether you have an NB above the door or you don't, are all operating off of that playbook. We're all trying to operate off of the same assets. Sometimes we do allow a Foot Locker or a DTLR to create their own assets because it speaks better to their consumer. But we have the same sort of brand guidelines that we're all operating off of. And I think that level of consistency has also allowed us to have these opportunities where things are popping in different ways. So we'll also allow a JD Sports to have a 550 exclusive, and they'll have their own product and their own materialization on that product, which allows them to drive their own sort of energy while we're still telling the mega 550 story. So those two things sort of work in tandem for us to allow our wholesale partners, who are very important to us, to allow them to speak to their consumer with the right product for their consumer, but then also still feel like they're part of the bigger sphere.
Yeah, and so our team, Consumer Insights and Analytics team, what I love about our team is that we're fully embedded within the marketing organization. So we like to say we're marketers who happen to know research well, rather than be this like satellite team who doesn't have any skin in the game. We're talking again about like purpose and passion. I mean, I've been in New Balance for 7 years. I still have that like first week energy. Where I'm just like, I'm thrilled to go to work every day. Can't believe I get to do this. So it becomes, the sort of like driver of wanting to explore our first-party data is deep-seated. It's something that we absolutely screen for within the interview process. And so if you think about the importance of that first-party data, these are consumers who have a deep enough brand affinity that they chose us among all other options where they could buy. And we're not always the lowest price. Hopefully we have a fantastic experience, and we will sometimes have exclusivity, but we need to have the sort of humility to understand that when people are buying sneakers, they're making a statement, whether that be on field or in life. This is a very sort of like conspicuous consumption category. Like you are walking around all day, people are going to notice you and what you're wearing. We always look toe ahead at people, so I know exactly what all of you are wearing today. When we get into first-party data, sure, we have predictive analytics. We are looking at recency. We're looking at consumer lifetime value. What's been encouraging for us, though, is like sort of the growth of our first-party data and then how we're utilizing it to create those better experiences for consumers. So there are certain times where, yeah, you only need to know, like, hey, what did you buy last? And that tells you something about what you might want in the future. What we've done a better job of increasingly is adding sort of our team's capabilities to have a perspective on where we should go next. So if we're just analyzing first-party data, fantastic. If we have first-party data alongside website visitation behavior, if we have it alongside our custom research, and we're then, as a team, applying that with a marketing mentality, that becomes a very powerful combination. So we're not sort of just issuing a report, and we're not just hindsighting, we're saying, hey, based off of where we've seen the consumer going and what we've observed from our own data, that makes us really storytellers when we're in front of a wholesale partner to say, hey, we've seen all these signals from our own data. We believe that within your four walls, we can create this mutually beneficial scenario with this campaign, with this product introduction. And we've seen the results firsthand financially. Again, we're private, so I'll keep it at that. But it's a really exciting time to be in the brand and an area where I think the continued focus on first-party data will only continue.
All right, as we wrap up, two very quick questions. Either one of you can take a break. This is all about making the audience smarter. It's one of the things that brand innovators is really been known for. Can you guys think of a marketing objective you went after? Again, be as specifically vague as you can be. Totally understand. But think about a marketing objective that you went after in the last 2-3 years that sounded like a good idea, but you hit an unknown hurdle, and now looking back, you're like, oh, that hurdle was so obvious, we know not to do that again, or we know how to fix it. Anything comes to mind? It could be analytics size, could be marketing, could be strategy, could be literally anything.
I'll say internal process for the analytics side. So there's an old anecdote about sort of Pixar storytelling that's been beaten into the ground with how many people leverage Pixar. But I remember hearing an interview with the director when Coco was coming out, and they're talking about what's the process of making this. And the director said, I had that idea 6 years ago. And so that's my pressure test. Like, am I going to go live with this idea for 6 years until it actually gets produced? And on the analytics side, for us, it's not 6 years, but we do like to say, like, yes, you can have a novel insight, you can have a report that you find curious, but you have to be like the advocate for that work and the difference it's going to make for the consumer. And it's not going to be done a single time. And I think that's the thing, like in the past, we might have said, like, oh, we did this brilliant analysis, now we're going to share it once, and everything's going to change. And like, it just doesn't work. It takes frequent repetition internally until people, and our metric was always like, at the executive level, are people repeating it back to you? And as soon as you get that level of traction, then you can sort of move on to the next thing.
I will refer to what Charles coined for me, the dynamic legal environment that we live in. There has been a lot of effort. So during COVID, obviously, we were all very digitally focused. That's really where all of our dollars went. As we've gone back out into real life experiences, we're trying to help bolster our consumer data hub by collecting more consumer info at those points. We are running into, obviously, with privacy and PII, it has become a very challenging environment, and our legal team is probably on the more conservative side of things. So when we think about an activation at a New York City Marathon or a London Marathon, and trying to collect info from those consumers who might be stopping by an activation, all of a sudden I was in a world of trying to understand how like GDPR affects the information that I'm collecting, because the consumer might be actually from France as opposed to someone I want in the United States, and how do all of these things sort of intermingle? Can I transfer that data to my counterparts in EMEA? I'm not really sure. And so those are sort of the new hurdles that we're facing, which is a it like really makes my brain hurt and leads to lengthy conversations with our legal team. But in the end, I'm hopeful that we'll get to the point where we're able to sort of operationalize that and make sure that the consumer is being taken care of in the appropriate way legally. And then similarly, that we're able to build our database so that we can serve them with the great new running shoes that we have, or the great new opportunities that they have to engage with our brand. So that would be my statement. That's what keeps me up at night.
It keeps me up at night. Guys, thank you very much. I really appreciate you sharing this.